friends, let's chat about some of the things that you can expect when renting an apartment in Shenzhen, China. I am by no means an expert on apartment rentals. I am also not an agent. This is not a promotional video in any way. I've just lived in many apartments in Shenzhen, so I think I know a little bit about what to expect when renting, what to expect from the process, and what to expect from the actual lots, the actual apartments. Let's just get straight into it. You can expect apartments in Shenzhen city to be quite expensive relative to the smaller cities. So if you've lived in a smaller city before moving to Shenzhen like I did, you will find that Shenzhen's cost of rent is exorbitant compared to the cost of rent in the smaller cities. I'm not too sure about the comparison between, for example, the cost of rentals in the States or South Africa. I can't really do a price comparison in that sense, but what I can say is that relative to the smaller cities in China, you will find that the cost of rent is a lot more expensive in Shenzhen city. The cost of rent is also relative to the district that you're living in Shenzhen. So if you're living in the city center, or if you're living close to the ports, or if you're living in, let's say, the newer districts, or a district where there are more international facilities or schools, the cost of rent is multiplied, usually doubled, sometimes tripled. So these expensive districts would be those such as Futian, or Nanshan, sometimes Baoan, depending where, but then some of the districts will be cheaper. For example, Lohu, Longgang. So it really depends what's around the lot that you're renting. But even if you're living in a cheaper district, you will find that it's a little bit pricier than a smaller city. Finding an apartment and renting an apartment is usually a very quick and easy deal. You will be encouraged to only start looking for an apartment a week before you plan to move in, a week to 2 weeks before you plan to move in. The apartments here are rented very quickly. So if you looked at an apartment in March but you only planned on renting in April or June, or May, sorry, I just completely skipped May, the chances of that apartment still being available by then are very low. So you will be encouraged to start looking for an apartment a week to 2 weeks before you're planning on renting. But when you do consult with an agent, everything will move very, very quickly. They will usually send you a couple of options within the same day or within 2 or 3 days, and schedule a visitation 3 to 4 days after that. After the visitation, they usually expect you to make a decision because of the high turnover rate, as I mentioned. So overall, it's a pretty quick and easy process, especially because there are loads of agents around town. There are loads of agents specific to each district, specific to your budget, specific to the apartment style that you're looking for. So overall, a very seamless process. You can also expect to pay an agent fee, although I think this is commonplace everywhere in the world. The agent fee will vary. Sometimes it will be equivalent to half of your rent. Sometimes it will be equivalent to the entire cost of your rent for 1 month. Sometimes they'll just set their own fee. So, for example, last year the apartment that I rented, the agent fee was only 500 RMB, but this time around the agent fee was equivalent to half a month's rent. So it really does vary. It depends on the agent's experience, it depends on the intermediary company as a whole. Are they a freelancer? Are they working for a company? Etc. But you definitely can't expect to pay a fee, of course. I think that actually goes without saying. This is something that I only found out in the last year. It's very difficult to walk into an apartment complex or community garden and try to rent an apartment without having an intermediary, without having an agent. The problem with this is that the agent is very aware of the fact that you're not Chinese, and what I've found is that there is a different cost of rent for Chinese nationals and foreigners. Of course, the agent will tell the landlord that you're foreign, and then they will tell you what the foreign cost is. Now, I'm not saying that this is definitely the case. I'm just saying that this is what I've heard, this is what I've seen in my own experience. So the cost of rent might be higher if you're foreign, and there's actually also no way to verify besides maybe if you have a Chinese friend, ask your Chinese friend to find out the cost of rent, and then you find out the cost of rent, and then just check if it's the same. Upon signing the rental contract, you will be expected to pay 2 months rent as a deposit plus 1 month's rent. So in total, after signing the contract, you will pay 3 months rent. It is quite a sum of money, especially if you're renting an apartment that's a little bit more expensive, but that's just the way things work here. In the smaller city that I was living in before, it was usually 1 month's rent as a deposit and then 1 month's rent, so in total 2 months rent. But in Shenzhen, in total it's 3 months rent. What I've also found in my time living in different apartments in Shenzhen city is that the apartments are pretty at first glance, but when you really look closely, you notice all the loose ends. I find that apartments here are renovated very quickly, probably within 2 to 3 months, at the expense of attention to detail. So you'll find paint splatters on the flooring, you'll find that the paneling is not really polished or it's coming off. Even if it's a new apartment, you might find that there are permanent stains because of chemicals that have been used. You might find that there are glue or grouting splatters on the tables or the floors or the door frames. You might find that the glass is completely scratched, so windows or glass tables or glass cabinets. So I find that when you visit a place, it looks really pretty at first glance, but then when you move in and you really look closely, you see that things are kind of ugly. So I do suggest that when you look at a place, take the time to really look into every nook and cranny to ascertain if it's cleanly, to ascertain if it's finished off. These little things can really become an eyesore once you notice them, especially if you're renting a place that's brand new, that's just been renovated. So do make sure to check out those little nooks. Another thing that I've found and that my partner and I have been discussing quite frequently is our finding that the layout of apartments here are very utilitarian, but not necessarily intuitive. So we feel that a lot of times the layouts don't really make sense for like a normal person. It seems almost like the apartments are built for someone to just come home, sleep, and not really live in the apartment, not really be there all day. You'll find things like furniture being in odd places, plugs being in odd places, the bed taking up the entire room so you can't really move around it. Just really awkward placement of furniture, awkward layouts, and you'll also find that the kitchen is always the smallest room of the house. So it's almost built with the impression that the tenants won't really be cooking. It's been quite a pain trying to find an apartment that has a kitchen that's not even big enough for two people, just big enough for someone to feel comfortable in there while cooking. So while the apartments might be quite practical, I don't find that they're intuitive in any way or that they feel homey. The apartments that do feel homey are in the nicer districts and are very, very expensive. Noisy neighbors are unavoidable. You're just always going to find that you're living in a place where your upstairs neighbors or the adjacent neighbors or downstairs neighbors are noisy. This is a very densely populated country. There are lots of children around. So you will find that you always have noisy neighbors. I've also found, after speaking to property management, that the layers between apartments are very poorly insulated. So you will hear every little movement that your neighbor is doing. So that's just something that's unavoidable. Also, it's very likely that you will always be exposed to construction noise. After all, this is a developing city, a very quickly developing city. So it's likely that you'll always be exposed to some sort of drilling, grinding, or hammering. When renting an apartment, you might find that your apartment is part of a community garden, in which case there will be a nice little central garden where children can play, where you can go for a walk. Other times there won't be a central garden, so it might just be the apartment building and then the outside world. Whereas if you're part of a community garden, when you leave your apartment building, you walk into a garden, and it's kind of like a gated community, if you will. So you have to walk through the central garden to exit the community, and there will usually be security at the front. So sometimes you'll have a central garden, sometimes you won't, but you definitely will pay more money for a community garden. Something that's definitely the case with every apartment that you might rent is that it allows for an excellent level of accessibility. There will always be grocery stores around, hardware stores around. You'll usually be 5 to 15 minutes from the subway station. There are parks all across the city, so the chances of you being close to a park are very high. Let's see. Pretty much everything is accessible in this city. No matter where you're living, you'll always have access to recreation, leisure, food, transport. So this is definitely a big benefit of living in Shenzhen city, for sure. Something that I only found when renting this apartment is that the cost of internet will vary or might vary if you're foreign. So what I found when installing this internet, the agent helped us to install this internet, and the service provider was frustrated because the agent tried to get us on a plan that is usually, I would say, serviced to Chinese people in terms of it costing less. And the service provider was frustrated for kind of exposing them for doing that. So if you're alone without an agent who has your best interests at heart, it'll be very hard to determine whether the cost you're paying is the actual cost or if it's been inflated because you're not a Chinese national. But just keep in mind that it might vary. Overall, it's a real joy to be living in Shenzhen city, to be living in such a cosmopolitan city where literally every person that is here was not born here. It's wonderful having such a significant amount of access all the time, to have such a significant level of convenience. The public transport system is just incredible, and the layout of the city is just beautiful. It's just stunning. I think whoever designed the city did an excellent job of balancing urban and nature. I hope that this video is helpful for those of you who are considering renting an apartment in Shenzhen. If you have anything that you'd like to add, if I perhaps missed some of the things that you could expect when renting, please let me know in the comments. If you have any further questions about renting in Shenzhen, please let me know. If you are in the process of renting, please let me know where you're coming from and where you're planning on staying in Shenzhen. Thanks for watching. I really hope I gave you some useful and interesting information. Please remember that the information that I relayed in this video is my own, based on my own experience and based on my own trials and tribulations with renting an apartment in China. Have an excellent day, everyone, and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.